SaharaTV, you're welcome back. We're still on the issue of migration, African migration for that matter, and the perils that happen ever so frequently on the Mediterranean. Right now, we are blessed to have informed opinion reaching us from Joe Penney. Joe Penney is a journalist who has worked and still works extensively in West Africa. You're welcome to SaharaTV, Joe.
That's great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for making time with us, and I hope you don't mind me calling you Joe.
No, absolutely not.
Okay, so first of all, let me ask you, from your experience, from all the research you've done, from all the work you've done, how bad is this problem?
It depends on who you mean. Who is it bad for? People are talking in the media about it's a European problem, when in actuality it's a West African problem. When in Mali, for example, majority of youth want to leave the country because they don't think that there's enough opportunities for them in their own country. That's a Malian problem first and foremost, not a European problem. But I would say that it's definitely a major problem, but I would say that it's also a symptom of a larger issue, which is the fact that young men in particular don't see a future for themselves in West Africa and would rather risk their lives going to Europe just to make a few bucks to send back home.
So you work in the field. Can you tell us, is this real or is it perceived? Because a lot of people think that the grass is always greener on the other side. But working in Africa and seeing the reality on the ground, is this real or is it perceived?
I would say that even if 1 out of 10 people succeed in making their lives better, who go, for example, say in a village in Western Mali, 1 out of 10 people who go succeed in making their lives better. That is enough for people to not be dissuaded by the fact that people go and die. That is enough for people to say, well, even though those 9 others didn't succeed, that's because they didn't do something right on the way. So I will succeed, even though those other people weren't able to get what they wanted.
And recently, there seems to be an escalation in the rate at which people are actually trying to flee, so to speak, their homelands in search of greener pastures. What do you think accounts for this in recent times? I mean, the escalation.
Yeah, well, I think if you look at the statistics about people who are dying in the Mediterranean, I think the main uptick in people going is because of the civil war in Syria, but also because of the situation in Libya, whereas there's no real central government, and therefore armed groups can control the ports and can allow people to go at any time. But I don't think actually that situations in West Africa are actually changing enough to drive people away. I think this is a pretty steady stream of people who want to leave. And it's been like that for the past 20 years or so.
So there's a lot of focus on the Mediterranean, where almost every couple of weeks we hear about, a boat capsizing, stuff like that. But there's also a situation going on the Sahara Desert where it seems to be underreported. What have you found out with the situation on the Sahara? Yeah,
well, I, along with my colleague, we went to Agadez, which is in northern Niger, last year, and we found that Agadez is basically the last point for migrants who are traveling to Libya before they go across the Sahara Desert. And that trip across the Sahara Desert is, if not more dangerous than the trip across the Mediterranean. Because first of all, in the Mediterranean, there are some semblance of rescue missions. In the Sahara Desert, there are no rescue missions. And there is no way of verifying how many people died because there's no European government presence, and the Niger government doesn't have the means nor the will to count the number of migrants dying. nor does the Libyan government. So these migrants are at the mercy of human smugglers who don't have their best interests in mind at all. So they travel across the desert, 30 people to one pickup truck, Toyota Hilux pickup truck. And if the smuggler wants to sell them off to an armed group, he can do that, because who's going to stop them? They're completely at the mercy of people throughout this entire trip across the desert. And then once they get to Libya, different groups in Libya control different parts of Libya. And each time they have to pay taxes. So if you're talking about the amount of money that people spend to go to Europe, it actually equals 2 or 3 round-trip tickets if they were able to fly there, if they were able to get visas. So it's a very precarious situation.
That's pretty grim. And we have also connected this whole issue with xenophobia at some point. In Libya, for instance, I remember several years back when I was in Ghana, we received reports of some Ghanaians who were in prison in Libya and nobody even knew about this. There seems to be a certain, or at least at that time, there seemed to be a certain, unacceptance, if you will, of people, foreigners passing through or at least staying in Libya. Can you speak to this?
Yeah, I mean, we've met with a number of people from Senegal and Gambia and Guinea who had been deported from Libya. Actually, a large amount of people, once they get to Libya, are arrested by whatever militia or armed group. Sometimes they work as slaves, sometimes they don't get paid, sometimes they are just thrown in prison for months at a time with nothing to eat, really dismal conditions, and other times they get deported. I don't think Libya is a great place for any human being right now, let alone migrants from sub-Saharan Africa. So the fact that they have to go through Libya is really a testament. I mean, just the fact that they're able to reach the Mediterranean Sea, that already means that they've dealt with a whole lot of really, really serious hardships and obstacles along the way, and especially in Libya.
Finally, Joe, the EU has come up with certain pointers as a solution to this problem. This is not the first time we're hearing anything like this, but they seem to be more, very convinced that this time they kind of have nailed it down. How do you feel about the EU's response to this problem?
The EU's response to this problem is, I haven't seen any real concrete measures that they're trying to take, but basically they're not going to allow any more immigrants into the EU. That's what they've made clear. And if they start allowing more immigrants in, then these right-wing groups like the National Front in France and UKIP in the UK will start talking and getting more and more political power. So they're not going to let vast numbers of immigrants in anytime soon. So where does that leave a solution? The final solution that they'll come up with is to just have more surveillance, more deportation, and just order even more, which will in turn harder and harder for people to go to Europe, because that's not going to stop them from trying.
Okay, let's treat this as a part B of my question, Joe. People suggest that the world owes Africa something. Africa was pillaged, so to speak, for years and years and years. And now the tables have turned. Africans are the ones who are running to go seek greener pastures from places where they feel like people who pillaged their country, owe them something. What's your take on this? Do you think Africans deserve anything? Do you think anybody owes Africans any debt at all to, fulfill?
Yeah, well, I would just say that when a country colonizes another country, it's only natural that the people who've been colonized seek opportunity in the country that colonized them. What I would say is that Europe doesn't feel like it owes Africa anything, and that's the most important thing, because they're not about to change their immigration policy simply because they colonized Africa 40 years ago. So I would say that even if they morally owed something, it's irrelevant in the days of today's politics, whether or not they morally owe something to Africans, because that's just not how politics works.
Joe Penney, thank you so much.
It's up to Africa. Sorry, if I could just add something, it's up to the African government, and if Malians if the Malian government wants it to keep its citizens in Mali, it has to create development for its citizens and not wait for Europe to give it aid programs and stuff like that.
Thank you so much, Joe Penney. We really appreciate your time. Joe Penney is a journalist who works in West Africa. Stay tuned. This is SaharaTV. More on the radar.